I never meant for him to read it. It was just a diary stitched in velvet, tucked in the drawer he never opened. 40 years of quiet thoughts, folded into pages no one asked about. No drama, no accusations, just memories. I wrote in it the night he forgot our anniversary, the day I miscarried and he left for a business trip, the time I cooked for 12 and he brought home pizza. I wrote because it was safer than speaking. Then, last Thursday, he looked at me from across the living room, the same room we shared every night for 4 decades, and said if I could go back, I think I would have chosen differently. That was all. He didn't yell. He didn't explain. He just went back to watching the news, like those words weren't a knife handed to me with the blade up. I didn't argue. I just folded the laundry, brushed my hair, and placed the diary back in its drawer. Unlocked. That night, I stayed at my sister's. He didn't ask why. But the next morning, he collapsed on the floor beside the desk, clutching something in his hand. The paramedics said it was stress, possibly the heart. But I saw what he was holding, the diary, and it was open. To the page I wrote after our wedding night. Tonight, I learned how to feel alone, while lying next to someone who swears I'm his forever. It was our 40th anniversary. No balloons, no dinner reservations, just me in the kitchen at 4 p.m, frosting a small cake I'd bought from the corner bakery, the same one I used to walk past every morning on my way to work back when I still worked. I used the old white tablecloth, the one with the little embroidery at the corners. It had a wine stain from our 25th anniversary. He never noticed it then, either. I set 2 plates, 2 forks, and lit a small candle, even though it was still daylight. He came in at 5:47 p.m, set his keys down on the counter, didn't even glance at the cake. He just muttered something about traffic, then sat on the couch and turned on the news. I brought him a slice on a plate anyway. He took it, didn't look up. A soft thanks that felt more like muscle memory than gratitude. I sat at the table alone, fork in hand, cake untouched. I looked across at the empty chair, the one he used to pull out for me when we were still new. It was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that hums in your ears and reminds you what silence really sounds like. I looked at the little candle. It flickered once, then died. Just like that. I don't know why I reached for the drawer that night, but I did. The diary was there, its edges worn, soft from being touched, but never opened by anyone but me. I didn't write much, just one line. 40 years. He still doesn't know that I like lemon cake, not vanilla. Then I closed it, put it back, and went upstairs before the news ended. I don't know what made him open that drawer. He wasn't the curious type. For 40 years, he left my things untouched, like a room in the house he never felt invited into. But that night, maybe something in my silence unsettled him. The TV was still playing when I climbed the stairs. I heard the soft creak of the drawer beneath the lamp. Didn't rush down, didn't stop him. Maybe I was tired of protecting him from how I really felt. He didn't call my name, didn't storm upstairs. He just stayed quiet. The next morning, I came down to find the diary still open on the kitchen table, his reading glasses folded next to it. The page it was open to wasn't the lemon cake entry from last night. It was one from 32 years ago. Today he told me I overreacted again. I smiled, but my throat burned. I wish he knew that when I go quiet, it's not peace, it's retreat. He had underlined it, once, with a pencil he must have taken from the drawer. I sat in the same chair where I'd served him cake the night before, looked at that faint grey line and realised he hadn't ignored me all these years. He just never asked where I went when I went silent. There were other pages folded at the corners, entries from years he thought were fine. The time I stayed overnight at the hospital alone. The time I cancelled a trip to help his sister move. The time I told him I wasn't cold, just tired. He had read them all, folded them with care, but didn't say a word. That night, he didn't come to bed. I heard the hallway floor creak just once around 3 a.m. He passed my door, but didn't knock. I wonder if he was scared of what he'd find if I let him in. The hospital called just before noon. He'd had chest pains at work. They said it wasn't serious, likely stress. I thanked the nurse, hung up, then sat in silence with the phone still in my hand. 40 years, and I still hesitated, not out of indifference, but out of confusion. Was I his wife in paperwork only, or still the person he needed? I put on the old cardigan. The pale grey one he used to say made me look cosy. It didn't fit the same anymore, but it still smelled faintly of cedar and lavender from the closet sachet. When I arrived, he was alone, curtains drawn. IV line in his arm, but his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling like it was trying to tell him something. He looked at me, really looked, not past me, not through me, just at me. His voice cracked when he said, "I read everything." I nodded. Didn't ask him what he thought. Didn't need to. He reached for my hand, and I didn't move mine away, but I didn't close it around his either. We just hovered there, close, not quite touching. A nurse came in, cheerful and loud, startled us both. He pulled his hand back gently. I smiled politely. When she left, he whispered, "I didn't know I was hurting you." And I whispered back, "I didn't want to hurt you by telling you." He exhaled slowly, not angry, just tired, like someone who had just realised how long he'd been walking with a limp. Before I left, I placed the cardigan on the chair by his bed. He watched me do it. And as I stepped into the hallway, I heard him say, almost too soft to catch, "Don't throw it out. It still smells like you." That was the last thing he said before everything changed. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not yet. Not even him. But that morning, I did 3 things. First, I watered the roses, the ones he never noticed I kept alive. They had been our anniversary gift decades ago. He'd forgotten, but I remembered which ones bloomed the day he missed our 10th. Second, I opened the hall closet, pulled down the suitcase I hadn't touched since Maddie's wedding. It still had a dried flower petal inside, pressed between 2 receipts. I didn't cry, just folded it back in, like I was tucking away a version of myself that had served her purpose. The third thing I did was write one last page in the diary. Today, I made no speech. I didn't ask for an apology. I packed light, because dignity doesn't weigh much. I left the diary on the kitchen counter, open again to a blank page. I didn't want him to read it. I wanted him to fill it. I cooked him lunch, not out of habit, but because I wanted the last meal I ever made in that kitchen to taste like rosemary and peace. He noticed the suitcase. His eyes scanned it, then me. But he didn't ask. We ate quietly, and when I washed the last dish, I didn't dry my hands. I just looked at him and said, "I'll be staying with Maddie a few days. You'll be all right." He nodded, not in permission, but in acceptance, and that was the closest he had come in years to saying, "I understand." Maddie had stepped out for groceries. Her house was always full of colour fridge magnets, finger paintings, cushions in shades that didn't match, but somehow felt like home. I sat by the window, the old rotary phone beside me. She'd kept it for aesthetic, but it still worked. I liked the way it sounded, like time hadn't rushed quite so fast. I thought he might call, just once, maybe not to say he missed me, but to ask what he should do with the socks, or where the sugar had gone. But the phone didn't ring. Instead, I heard the wind brush past the wind chimes. And a dove cooing somewhere near the neighbour's fence. It had been 2 days. I told myself he was giving me space. But I knew him better than that. Silence wasn't his apology. It was his shield. I stood up, stretched slowly, and walked past Maddie's bookshelf. She'd placed a framed photo of us there, me holding her at 5, missing a front tooth, smeared with chocolate. There was no photo of my husband, not even at their wedding. She had drawn her own lines, quiet ones. I admired that. I made tea, the kind he didn't like. Too floral, he used to say. But it tasted like calm now. As I sipped, I caught sight of my overnight bag, still neatly zipped, not because I was unsure, but because I knew there would be no rush to go back. No one was asking, and that silence wrapped around me like a light quilt, not heavy, not warm, just there. When Maddie returned, she didn't ask about him either. She handed me a fresh croissant and said, "I saw lilies on sale. Thought you might like some for the room." I nodded, and I did. I didn't mean for anyone to find it. Not Maddie, not him. It was a letter I wrote years ago. After the miscarriage, when the silence between us was louder than any fight could have been, I'd hidden it in an old cookbook, the kind no one opened anymore, the pages slightly stuck together from years of steam and sorrow. I pulled it out that morning while looking for something to make for lunch. The envelope had yellowed, my name, his name, still written in my old cursive. You didn't hold my hand that day, and I didn't ask. We both thought strength was silence, but grief speaks in gestures, and I was waiting for yours. I remembered writing it while he was in the backyard, mowing the lawn. He didn't know I was crying in the pantry. I never gave it to him, not because I changed my mind, but because I didn't think he'd read it. Not then, not when he thought healing was moving on. I sat with the letter now, not sure what to do. Should I destroy it? Rewrite it? Hand it to him, belated, bruised? Instead, I placed it beside the diary on Maddie's kitchen counter. 2 truths written in different decades, bound by the same thread. I had been silent for too long, but not absent. That night, I heard Maddie reading it. She didn't say anything, but when she passed by me in the hallway, she placed her hand gently on my shoulder. Just once, no words, and it meant everything. Sometimes we don't write letters to be read. We write them to see ourselves clearly, and in that moment, I remembered who I had been and who I still could be. I was folding towels when I heard the screen door creak. Maddie had taken her daughter to piano, so the house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock and the faint birdsong outside. At first, I thought it was the wind again. But when I walked past the hallway and looked out, I saw him. He was sitting on the porch bench. Same bench we'd bought at the flea market years ago. His back slightly hunched, hands folded together too neatly. That's how I knew he was nervous. He didn't knock, didn't call my name, he just sat. I didn't open the door, not right away. I made tea. My hands shook slightly, but the rhythm helped. Pour, steep, breathe. When I finally stepped out, he didn't stand. His eyes scanned the garden, then the porch light. Finally, they landed on me. He said, "I didn't come to talk." I nodded. We sat in silence. 10 minutes, maybe 15, long enough for the shadows to stretch across the yard, long enough to notice he was wearing the old green jacket I used to patch for him every winter. It still had the stitch I made crooked on purpose, because he said it reminded him of the way I laugh. I hadn't thought about that in years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, folded small, soft from wear. He placed it between us on the bench. I found the letter and the diary. He didn't say sorry, didn't ask questions. But his voice was different, like something inside him had gone still. I didn't reach for the paper. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. What mattered was that he had read it, and that he was here. Dinner wasn't planned, it just happened. Maddie returned with the groceries, surprised to find him still there. She didn't ask questions either, just set 3 plates down on the table like it was any other Thursday. That was her way, gentle but exact. We sat like a family might, not a close one, but one that still remembers the shape of gathering. He passed the bread without a word. I handed him the butter dish like I used to, quiet, clean, no edge in the motion. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Maddie asked him, "Do you still like lemon chicken?" He paused, then smiled. Not a wide smile, but the kind that pushes slightly into the eyes. "I do," he said. She nodded. That was it. But something shifted, subtle, soft, like the tablecloth settling. Later, he reached for the salt and accidentally nudged his spoon against his glass. The sound was light, but my chest reacted. That same sound used to echo every night during our old dinners, when he'd stir his tea while I cleared the plates, and neither of us knew how to say, "I miss you." Tonight, when that sound came, I didn't flinch. I looked at him instead, and for the first time in a long time, he looked back and didn't look away. Maddie broke the silence by offering dessert, a lemon tart. He took a piece, but didn't finish it. Instead, he placed his fork down gently and said, "I remember this. You used to make it every year around this time." I smiled, faint but real. "You never ate the crust," I replied. He chuckled. "Still don't." No apologies, no grand gestures, just the sound of 2 people remembering how they used to speak without needing volume. That night, after dinner, I stayed behind in the kitchen. The sink was full, but I didn't rush. I let the warm water run over the same old bowl I'd scrubbed 100 times before. Through the open door, I saw him helping Maddie with the dishes. He never used to do that. Not out of malice, just habit, like the way people forget how to listen, because silence becomes normal. He handed her a dish towel. She laughed at something he said. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell it wasn't small talk. Then he glanced toward me, not by accident. He was checking, quietly, whether I was still part of the room, and I didn't look away. Later, after they left, I sat in the living room with a blanket over my lap, the same one he once bought in a roadside shop because he said the colour reminded him of autumn, and me. I hadn't used it in years. I turned toward the bookshelf, the one I used to keep our family photos on. At the back, buried behind old cards and birthday letters, was a photo of us from decades ago. I had turned it face down at some point. I didn't even remember when. I reached for it, turned it over. In the photo, we were young. I was holding a bunch of sunflowers. He was laughing mid-sentence. Neither of us posed, just captured. Suddenly, I felt something unfamiliar. Not forgiveness, not quite trust, but maybe an opening. A place in me that for the first time in years wasn't waiting for an apology, but watching to see if he might actually change. And tonight, for the first time, he didn't make a promise. He just showed up. That mattered more. The next day, he came by again. No call, no warning, just the sound of his car pulling into the driveway the way it used to when we still shared weekends. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked surprised, as if I'd read his mind. "I forgot my coat," he said. I nodded, stepping aside. But I knew that coat was hanging right there on the back of the chair in his own kitchen. This visit wasn't about a coat. He paused just inside the hallway. Something about the air felt different between us, like we were both standing in a memory, but didn't want to name it. He glanced at the table. My journal was there, closed. The same one I had been writing in quietly for years, never expecting anyone else to see it. He didn't ask, didn't touch, just looked at it then at me. But this time, his eyes didn't carry the weight of blame or defense or tired detachment. They held something else, a softness, a kind of quiet grief. "I didn't know you kept writing," he said finally. His voice wasn't ashamed, just honest. I nodded again. I never stopped. He sat on the edge of the couch, not fully settled, but not ready to leave. His hands rested on his knees. But I noticed how one thumb kept rubbing a circle over his palm, a nervous habit. He used to do that before parent-teacher meetings. "I didn't read much," he added, eyes still low. "Just one page." I felt my stomach tighten, not from fear, but from the quiet truth of being seen, really seen. "Was it the one about your birthday?" I asked. He nodded, and when he looked up this time, I saw it. The shift. The same eyes that used to look past me now held still, present, listening. "I didn't know you cried that night," he whispered. "Neither did I, not until I wrote it down." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the years we didn't say things and the strange comfort of finally being able to. He didn't stay long. Just stood quietly, touched the back of the chair once, and left without his coat. But the way he looked at me as he stepped outside, it wasn't regret. It was recognition. And that changed something in me too. It was Maddie who came the next day. No husband, no children, just her. She brought the old blue tin of butter cookies we used to open every Christmas. This time, she said softly, "I didn't bake, but I thought maybe this still counts." I invited her in. The house was still, and I was still learning how to sit with its silence without feeling like it meant something was missing. We sat at the table. She reached for the lid and paused. "Can I ask something, Mom?" She hadn't called me that in months. Not coldness, just distance, a shift of tone. But today, the word sounded warmer, like it wanted to stay in the room a little longer. "What did Dad read?" Her question wasn't accusing. She didn't seem angry or even curious in the way daughters sometimes are when they want to find someone to blame. She looked tired, but open. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid the journal toward her across the table, not for her to open, just to know it was there, real, not hidden anymore. She didn't touch it, but she did something else. She took a folded cloth napkin from her purse and began unfolding it carefully, like it held something fragile. Inside was an old note I wrote her years ago. When she had failed her first college exam, I had completely forgotten it, but she hadn't. "You told me I was more than a grade," Maddie whispered. "That love doesn't measure itself in perfect moments." I nodded. I still believe that. She placed the note beside the journal. Didn't say anything more, but her eyes met mine and I saw it, the flicker of something deeper than words. Forgiveness born not from explanations, but from quiet remembering. She reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on mine, not to fix anything, not to make a scene, just to let me know she saw me. That was more than enough. That night, after Maddie left, I stayed in the kitchen a little longer than usual. The cookie tin was still open, a single biscuit left untouched, and beside it, my journal sat closed with her folded napkin still resting on top like a seal neither of us wanted to break. I made myself tea, though I didn't drink it. It sat cooling beside me as I took out the drawer where I kept old things that didn't belong to any room anymore. Inside, there was a letter, unsent, written years ago on one of those nights when the silence in our bedroom felt heavier than anything we ever argued about. "I married you knowing you might never love me loudly," I had written, "but I hoped you'd try in your quiet way." I never gave it to him. I wasn't brave enough then. Or maybe I was afraid that he'd say, "I never promised that." But tonight, holding that letter, I realised something. I didn't need to hear it from him anymore, because through the way he looked at me yesterday, through the pause at the doorway, the journal untouched, the coat he didn't take, I finally understood. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be received. Some wounds don't need apologies, only presence. I folded the letter once more, not in shame, not in longing, but in peace, and tucked it back into the drawer where it belonged, not as a burden, but as a chapter. Then I reached for the small hair clip Maddie used to wear when she was 6. It was shaped like a tiny daisy, chipped at one petal. She thought I threw it away, but I kept it. Because even the chipped things held stories worth saving, I set it beside the letter. 2 quiet things, 2 memories that shaped me without needing to be read aloud. Outside, a soft breeze moved the curtain just a little, and I let it. The next morning, I folded the laundry with more care than usual, smoothing sleeves, aligning corners, as if the way I packed the fabric might somehow straighten the folds in my heart. I didn't leave a note, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because everything had already been said, just not out loud. There was no suitcase, just a canvas tote with a change of clothes, a book I hadn't finished, and a photo, Maddie at age 10, her front tooth missing, smiling like she had nothing to prove. I left the house while the shadows were still long. He was in the kitchen, pretending to stir his coffee, though I knew he didn't drink it anymore. He looked up, but didn't speak. I didn't either. But we both paused. A long pause. The kind that doesn't fill a silence, it respects it. And then he did something unexpected. He reached toward the table and slid the unopened envelope forward. The one I knew he found in the drawer last night, the letter I'd written years ago. The one where I told him I had stayed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I thought love meant staying. I didn't take it. He didn't insist. It just sat there between us. Acknowledged. I stepped towards the door, paused, let my hand rest on the frame like it might remember how many times I had hesitated there before walking away. But this time, I didn't wait for the right moment. I made it and left, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with a full inhale. Outside, the air was cool. The sun was low, stretching soft gold across the lawn. I walked to the bench beneath the old elm tree, the one Maddie used to climb, and I sat alone, but not lonely, because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come looking for me. I wasn't asking to be seen. I was already here. There's a memory I hadn't visited in years. It was our 2nd anniversary. We couldn't afford anything special back then, just a home-cooked meal and a tablecloth we borrowed from his mother. The lace edges had a tiny tear he kept folding to hide, as if pretending it was whole would somehow make us more so. We sat at that kitchen table, hands still a little unsure, laughing over burnt rice and too much salt in the soup. He reached across and held my wrist, not my hand, just the wrist, like he was checking if I was still there, still pulsing, still willing. I remember I smiled. Because it felt more real than any bouquet ever could. Back in the present, I stood in the hallway and saw that same tablecloth, faded now, creased from storage, but folded neatly in the linen drawer. He had kept it all these years. Not the ring box, not photos, but that cloth. Soft and fraying, just like we had become. And in that small moment, I saw him again. Not the man who said he regretted, not the one who forgot birthdays, but the boy who folded lace edges to make me laugh, who held my wrist like it meant something. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself remember without bitterness. There was no music, no glowing light, just quiet acceptance. Love, I realized, doesn't always leave loud echoes. Sometimes it's the softest steps that last the longest. And even if regret came later, there were years when we had tried, not perfectly, not always kindly, but we showed up. And that counts for something. In the drawer beside the bed, I placed the folded tablecloth on top. No note, no ribbon. Just there, for him to find one day. Maybe he'd remember too. It happened 2 mornings later. I was watering the plants by the window, the same ones he used to forget existed. The sun spilled across the tile like a gentle apology. He walked into the room slowly, his shoulders more tired than usual. But there was something in his hands. The envelope, the one I thought he might never open. He didn't say a word, just held it out, creased and slightly smudged like it had been read more than once, like he'd held it overnight, letting the words soak into the spaces regret never reached. He placed it on the table between us. Then he did something I hadn't seen in years. He sat, with both hands on the table open, no defence, no crossed arms, no jokes to push away the silence. He looked down, and I could see his throat tighten, not from anger, from trying to say something he didn't know how to. "You wrote that a long time ago," he finally whispered. His voice cracked like old wood, like he'd rehearsed it too many times, and still didn't get it right. I nodded. There was nothing to explain. He had read it. He knew. "I didn't know you felt that way." Another pause. I didn't know how to ask. He wasn't crying, but his fingers kept tracing the edges of the letter, like touching the paper might let him reach the version of me he missed while standing right beside her all those years. "You stayed," he said, and I kept forgetting why. A silence followed, but this time it wasn't painful. It was wide, like space finally made for something new to grow. I reached across, just a little, and placed my hand gently over his, not to comfort him, not to fix anything, but to let him know I had heard him. Not just the words, but the effort it took to say them. And sometimes that's the apology we never get out loud. He didn't ask me to come back. I didn't promise that I would, but in that moment, we broke something. Not apart, but open. He stood in the kitchen doorway, tired after work, his shirt rumpled at the collar, one button mismatched like always. I had just burned dinner. Again, the smoke curled up from the skillet like a shrug, and I remember bracing myself, ready for the usual sigh, the "why don't you just order next time" comment. But he didn't speak. Instead, he walked to the sink, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water. Not for himself, but for me. "Sit. You've been on your feet all day." That's all he said. I had forgotten that moment. Not because it wasn't important, but because I had buried it. Under louder ones, the sharp words, the slammed doors, the years we forgot how to say thank you. But now, with time peeling back the noise, I could see it clearly. His hands were never gentle, but that day they softened around the cup as he placed it in front of me. And I didn't say thank you, not because I didn't feel it, but because I didn't know it mattered that much. That's what gets lost in long marriages, the small kindnesses. They blur behind survival. But when I watched him 2 mornings ago, folding the letter like it might break, I realised he had never stopped trying. He just never knew how to make it loud. That moment in the kitchen, it wasn't just about burnt food. It was him learning in his own way how to stay, how to say, "I'm still here," even when it wasn't easy, even when he didn't say it right. And now, years later, I finally heard it. He didn't say it. Not once. No, "I'm sorry." No, "I was wrong." But sometimes forgiveness arrives differently. That afternoon, he was already sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. A cup of tea, my favourite kind, was steeping. The timer had already been turned off. The mug was placed at the seat I always used. The chair had been pulled out slightly, like he'd remembered. Not just where I sat, but that I used to arrive last. After cleaning everything first, I didn't speak. I just sat down, slowly, like slipping into an old song you thought you forgot the words to. He didn't look at me, but his hand, his rough, work-worn hand, reached toward the center of the table. Between us, he laid down something I hadn't seen in years, a folded handkerchief, faded, embroidered with the initials we once used in notes to each other, LPH. It was a small thing, insignificant to anyone else, but I had sewn that handkerchief for him our first year of marriage. He had kept it all this time. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. Forgiveness isn't about the apology. It's about recognizing the cost of forgetting each other. In that moment, we weren't two people repairing a marriage. We were just two people remembering they still existed in each other's world. There were no declarations, no promises, no sudden embrace, just a silence that wasn't empty this time, but full. He poured the tea for me, and I let him, and that was enough. The chair by the window sat empty, but the light still fell on it like it had always done. He had left early that morning, for a walk, he said. No destination, just air. I stayed behind, still holding the handkerchief from the day before, folded in the same way he left it on the table. On a quiet impulse, I opened the drawer where we kept old family things. Inside was the photograph, us 40 years ago, his tie too short, my hair too big, both of us trying, awkwardly, to smile. I placed it beside the mug, still on the table. No words spoken that morning, but something had changed. Not in what was said, but what no longer needed to be said. I reached for the diary, the one he had found, the one that had made him cry, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I flipped to the last entry. It wasn't finished. The last line simply read, "I wonder if he ever knew how much he meant to me, even when I said nothing." I didn't add to it. I closed the book softly, not to shut it, but to keep it. At noon, he returned from his walk. His hands were cold, but he looked lighter. We didn't talk about the diary, or the tea, or the photo. Instead, he nodded toward the kitchen and said, "You still burn toast the same way." And we both laughed, the first time in weeks. He's back in the habit of walking every morning now, says it clears his head, and me. I started writing again, not for him, not for the past, but for the part of me that forgot I had a voice, even in silence. The diary still lives in the drawer. He's never asked about it again. I've never added another entry. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because maybe he started listening differently. Some mornings, I still burn the toast. He still makes that same face. And somehow, that face means more now than all the words he didn't say before. Love doesn't always look like fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just knowing someone still chooses to sit with you, even after all the quiet years in between. That afternoon, as light poured again onto the window chair, I placed the handkerchief back in the photo box. Beside the picture of us, awkward and unsure, but trying. Trying was always the most honest part of our story. I don't know if he still regrets anything. Maybe he does. Maybe we both do. But I do know this regret doesn't have to be the ending. It can be the pause before the soft return. Before two people choose to sit down again and start over, with toast and silence and a cup of tea. And maybe that's the kind of love you never need to apologize for. Have you ever forgiven someone without saying a word, or quietly realized they had already forgiven you? Let me know if you're willing to share. Maybe someone else out there needs to read it too.